This is the first Climate Hustings held in Shetland, and it's organised by the Climate Cafe Shetland. We are a group of volunteers that run monthly cafes. We bring people together and we talk about climate change. So if you can join us in future events, please do.
I would like to hear from all candidates what you have done to reduce your own carbon footprint and what changes you've made in the way you live your lives.
In terms of what I've done personally, I think probably the main thing I've done personally is to take political action. I think the biggest thing that we can all do is to take political action. That doesn't just mean voting or standing for election. It means campaigning, it means writing to your elected representatives, it means speaking about issues about climate at work. So political action is probably the biggest thing I've done. But I also, I've done things in my personal life. I try and ride my bicycle instead of driving a car. I've tried to decarbonise my diet as well. I eat a lot more herring and mackerel than I used to, because that's an extremely low source carbon food.
In terms of what I've done myself, it's all a little bit sort of closer to home. So you can see I'm wearing 2 jumpers. That's because I never turn on the heating in my house. I just wear jumpers instead. And in winter when it gets really cold, sometimes I'll just wrap a giant blanket around myself and wander around the house looking like a really strange tartan-clad Roman senator or something in a toga. Thank goodness no one sees me. People make fun of me because I wear the same suit all the time. They'll probably make a bit more fun of me when they realise it's because it's a 20-year-old suit. I try to preserve everything I've got for as long as possible. I believe in sort of going for as high quality as you can and being quite disciplined about taking care of things in order to reduce consumption. And finally, I'm just trying to get rid of plastic in every respect out of my life. It is the ultimate manifestation of the triumph of sort of profit and Excel spreadsheet driven society over quality and sustainable products. So those are the sort of 3 things I do to try and lower my carbon footprint.
Me personally, what have I done to reduce my carbon footprint? 1 car family, cycle as much as I can, try and eat as much fish as I can. And in addition to herring and mackerel, herring and mackerel have got a 1 gram carbon per kilogram. But Shetland mussels, now that's where the real saving is. They're actually a negative carbon footprint. So I try and eat as much Shetland seafood as I can. And eat as much UK produce as I can. I try not to have avocados or fruits from abroad. I try and just eat and change my diet as much as possible. So I think that's enough from me.
I'm one of the good guys, I think. I separate out my waste, I put it into the right bins, I deliver it wherever it has to go. But I do not believe in net zero.
Just in terms of my personal commitment to decarbonising, I've got 2 young kids and I'm very keen to protect their future and make sure they don't feel the worst impacts of climate change in their lifetime. So I've already installed solar panels in my home. I've just recently moved towards an electric car, and I've also got plans to install a heat pump in my home in the later part of this year. So absolutely taking it seriously and doing all I can on a personal basis to decarbonise my lifestyle and my home in particular.
I suppose all the usual things, recycling, making sure you try and buy as local as possible, make sure that you don't, so I have a licence, I passed my test not that long ago, 4 years, but I don't really drive that often. I'm often on the bus or I car share with other people. So and I also do a lot of shopping on Vinted, so not buying new when you don't necessarily need to, trying to look at how you can reuse things and do things differently.
As I believe that God controls the weather and by extension the climate. I feel more inclined to lean on this source for an effective solution. We need to appease God. I believe that there is an element of personal responsibility involved. We can appease God as individuals, as a community, or as a nation. Ultimately, though, this responsibility may come down to you and me.
Should community benefit from the wind farms be used to tackle the significantly high levels of fuel poverty in Shetland by creating a fund to ensure every house in Shetland is warm all year round through the right home insulation and one heating source to decarbonise our footprint, which the lead indicator is very happy. And
Probably, I mean, what I would like to add to that for the candidates is the question is the level of community benefit that's being paid or expected to be paid at the moment, is that sufficient?
I'd like to put it to a different angle actually. I don't believe that benefit is the way that we need to be going forward. I actually think we need to be talking about ownership. If we'd continue to have 45% ownership in Viking, like the initial plan was, we would be making £29.5 million per year with the 45% ownership stake. And today we have £2 million into a community benefit pod. So benefit to ownership.
I think the answer to the question is really simple. Yes, absolutely. The issue that comes up day after day when I'm speaking to people on the doors is people cannot afford to heat their home, and that shouldn't be the case when we are producing so much energy.
In terms of our local manifesto, we reject all energy projects that aren't majority owned and controlled by communities. And I think that has to be the way forward. If we continue to allow corporations to control the development of renewable energy, they will put wind farms on all of the best spots, and there will be nothing left for community control of energy. We all know in Shetland, we know about the Garth wind farm in Culliver that's 100 times smaller than the Viking wind farm, yet makes exactly the same amount per year in terms of energy, because they own 100% of it, whereas we own hardly any of the Viking energy wind farm.
Rather than community benefit, I would have favoured the reduction in electricity bills. That was my, when the first consultation came around, that was what I put in. That would have been a better option.
For Reform UK, first thing we'd try to do would be to get a Shetland energy tariff in place, because then actually what you have is a direct, explicit statement of a maximum amount you'll pay per unit for your energy.
So we've said that we would be defining that community benefit so that funds and derived from local communities actually benefit them in a way that they haven't done so before. So we've said that we would mandate contributions in future consenting of offshore wind projects. We've established a community energy fund to ring-fence at least £100 million of Scotland resources we use as low-cost finance for those communities to develop or take equity in local energy projects. And that's really part of that, ensuring that the money is recirculated to the benefit of future generations and within our communities.
So I think, first off, a minimum of 20 needs to be tied to planning consent. If there is no 20% ownership, then you don't get planning consent. Secondly, I think we need to use the Scottish National Investment Bank to give low-cost loans or zero finance loans to communities that want to raise that capital to invest. A third option that's being trialled just now in the Isle of Lewis is that actually for their latest onshore wind farm is that there's a payback period, so that they're taking at least a 20% ownership and then paying back to the developer a 2-3 year period on that revenue, and once they've paid that back then they're able to start earning.
I would just like to make one comment. I think we're talking about climate change, we're talking about climate emergency, and to me the focus is too much on the economics. We are talking about something we need to do in order to survive, and we are talking, and people are mainly concerned how they can not only pay for it, but also make a profit. I think who makes the profit absolutely is vitally important, but I also think, to my mind, producing energy should not be profit driven, right? So we have to I think we need to turn a switch in the head, basically. And then we can talk about really what needs to be done to improve or to slow down this climate change. And that is not, about shifting 20% or 20% here, 20% there. Nobody talks about, we need to maybe use less, would be one thing. We also have to give people, I mean, if you talk about climate change just in terms of energy, you are already disempowering a lot of people, because a lot of people will feel there is not very much I can do about it. Yeah? You have to give something more tangible and maybe something that's slightly more effective. Yeah.
I mean, we are going to come to other subjects as well, but community benefit is one of the main issues discussed in this community. Colin, do you want to respond to what you've heard?
Well, I'd agree that we should have told Sid, but the party responsible for that's not here. You remember it was Sid was supposed to tell them the gas advert when they privatised British Gas. Yeah, I mean, community benefit isn't the ideal solution. EDF, for example, is owned by the state company in France, so it's just not Scandinavian as that looked. We need a plan of how we actually do it, and it needs coordinated, because we end up in a situation where everything, well, for example, not in Shetland, but on the mainland, people all driven to gas. And whether they go for district heating system, but they went for Copenhagen, when they basically, in the oil crisis, somebody forced Denmark into saying we don't want oil, heating sources and gas, we went for renewables. We need a plan and help people implement it, because it's not going to happen, because they passed their dream. All the parties agreed back, I think it was 2000 and something, on the climate change that Scotland was supposed to have in place by 2030. We're not going to make it. We haven't made it because actually we haven't had the political incentive to actually make it happen. Because you're relying on the private companies who are making money out of profit when they make money out of selling stuff isn't necessarily going to make sure you deliver it. So, for example, when Patrick Harvey said relying on electric utilities to give out LED lights was not the solution, he was correct. They needed more, and that's what they need. They need to actually have an action plan that's built in local communities about how you turn houses into using less carbon by properly insulation. Because as we've seen in the news, places where they're putting insulation that's inappropriate, it's led to houses having such a place we can't live in them. So actually they need professional advice about what's suitable for each location and what's suitable for each base. Because electric heating pumps may not be the solution everywhere. District heating could be the solution somewhere. It needs to be more reflective of what actually is available, what's suitable, because sometimes problem with electricity is in parts of Shetland the lines go down, so that's no help if you're relying on electricity for your heating. So they need to decentralise the grid as well, so it's not all one place, one heat system, and one power station in Lerwick when the lines are not reliable.
And I think it is that making sure that everywhere has that bespoke answer for them, because even different parts of Shetland, everybody needs different things, and different people need different things. So I think it is about recognising that not everybody's going to need the same stuff, but we need to work together. But it needs to be funded. That's the issue, because you can't deliver all these things unless there's the money to do it, because it's not a cheap way to go about things.
The council on land at the former airport at Scotston has a pivotal role to play in Shetland's net zero future. The Shetland Islands Council ran a well publicised expression of interest process for the development of that site. Do the candidates think that the result of that EOI process delivers best possible outcome for Shetland?
No, I don't think we got best value at all. I think this was the biggest failure that we've seen in this council term, and it was a capitulation to corporate power. I read stories about the British East India Company and how they grabbed land in India and other places. And I never thought I'd see how that felt. But I was in the room. It was an exempt item, so I'm not permitted to speak about it. But that's how it felt to me. It felt like we were rolling over to a large corporation who just played us in every way. It was a shared decision by the council. It was a majority decision. I voted against it. I pushed every possible opportunity I could to get a better deal. But we were played by a large corporation, and I was angry about it. This is one of the reasons why our campaign it focuses on standing up to corporations, because they are so powerful. They have their in-house lawyers, they have their in-house lobbyists, and how we stand up to corporations is a very difficult task. We need our whole communities to stand up. There is a role that politics needs to play, but we need to build a popular movement that realises the situation that we have.
The ownership of corporations is where we need to be focusing. You look at Sweden, they have Vattenfall, a state-owned energy corporation. You look at Norway, they have Statkraft, a state-owned energy corporation. Portugal, Spain, Korea, Japan, Finland. I could name Germany, RWE as well. So I could name so many countries in the world that have state-owned energy corporations, 50% or more owned by the government, sending dividend and revenue back into their NHS, into their education, into services that the government relies upon. And what we have here in the UK is we have a stripped out and hollow system that only has foreign investment. And that is where the challenge is. It's about the ownership of these corporations. Because big doesn't equal bad. It's a messy middle, it's grey, it's not black and white, and we need to be having that conversation respectfully with one another.
Yeah, so just dealing on the sort of wider point of dealing with corporations, I mean, not many people will be aware that Articles of Association of any company imposes a legal duty on them to absolutely maximise their profits as far as possible. So they're failing in their legal duty if they don't, which means the only chance for the community to be heard and be advocated for is by their representatives, at Parliament. And sometimes, all this talk of achieving consensus, working with stakeholders really just softens up representatives just to end up sort of doing what the corporations want. So I'd implore constituents at this upcoming election to go for a party that's happy to buck the trend, go against the grain, and fight against that which is not good for the community.
So food security is a pressing issue, particularly in the current global situation. What do you think should be done to improve Shetland's food security?
Think about this, we've handed over far too much power over our food system to supermarkets. Again, another corporation who are in this for profit. And we know what happens when there's a few days that the boat doesn't go, that the supermarket shelves empty. And for too long, governments have just they've handed over control of the food system to supermarkets, and we need to actually have politicians and governments that can actually have a proper strategy of how we're going to keep ourselves food secure. I think we have to take it very, very seriously. We have to have a proper national strategy for food security, and that's something that the Greens are committed to.
As I said, I think we need to really make sure we support those industries here that do produce food. So we really have to support the fishing industry and our crofters and farmers. So I think there is a lot more that could be done, but we need to make sure that we see all of our industries working together and that we recognise that there will be crossovers, and we've got to balance that, particularly when you look at spatial squeeze, when you look at the sea and all that does. You've got aquaculture businesses, you've got fishing. We need to find a way that everybody can work more in harmony, so that spatial squeeze isn't such an impact, so that we recognise the value of everything.
Do you want to respond to that directly? Because I saw you.
The Shetland produces a lot of food already, but almost all of it is exported. And the support is always towards exports. Like anybody that exports always gets support. Folk that are really keen on local production for local consumption gets very little support.
Yeah, and I think we need to change it. I mean, you can't. It's not as easy to go and buy Shetland salmon in Shetland, which is crazy when you think.
Yeah, but salmon is no very good thing to be produced.
No, but I'm just saying as an example.
Yeah.
So I absolutely agree that we need to do more to keep some of that local. Yeah.
So I mean, what sort of, if I could ask you, what sort of support is there available at the moment for local produce production? That's the right way of putting it.
Well, what we've always found is that you're constantly having to innovate, because you can get funding to set something up new,
but not sustain it.
But you cannot get. It's unsustainable. Yeah. It's unsustainable to produce food for Shetland consumption. So really, it needs support. It needs economic support. You can get subsidy for lamb and beef production. Try and get subsidy for vegetable production. It doesn't exist, basically. So it just makes it really difficult. And it's probably uneconomical to support it. But the thing with food security is, it's a bit like the pandemic. You don't need any of that stuff until it comes along, and then suddenly you've got this problem that you have to solve immediately. And it can be the same with food security, like Alex is saying about the shelves being empty. What happens if the boat's going to go for a month? Okay, then what are we doing? We're only eating fish and lamb. Seriously. We don't have much food in Shetland apart from fish and lamb.
And some concrete ideas. I think we need to be looking at our import costs on getting feed and getting hay and getting feed for the croft and up here on freight costs. I think we need to be keeping our abattoir open. That's an essential. I also think we need to be supporting our fishing industry far more with getting new generation and young folk into it, bringing back that skipper's ticket training here in Shetland. And then also in terms of food security, housing developments. It's really, I was down door knocking in Sandwich in one of the Shetland developments, and for every 5 or 6 houses there was a poly club, and I thought that was brilliant, and you could see that the community was getting together to grow food. And there's something that we've called for in our local manifesto it's kind of captured the imagination of folk, is this idea of a grower's box, actually just giving folk a starter pack, just to start to have those conversations in a family. Beetroot, tomatoes, lettuce, nasturtiums, just to get that idea of we don't have to buy everything, and it will then evolve into supporting transition dairy fields and maybe getting a polycrib.
From a crafter point of view, it's not worth my while to go and grow vegetables. Whether I could let out a piece of ground for somebody to grow vegetables on, I don't know, but it would be possible. But food security in Shetland is more to do with food security for the whole country, and I think that when they sold out their fishing rights to the EU, I think that was not in the best interest of food security. It's food security for the EU rather than food security for us.
Fishing is of utmost importance. It's what's extremely important economically and culturally to Shetland. It is an extremely clean, nutritious, protein-rich and carbon-low food source. We have, under the United Nations Convention Laws of the Sea, the right to a 200-mile exclusive economic zone or to the midline between another country of their zone. And we believe that should be pushed as far as possible. So for the exclusive use of our own fishing industry, or in a very, very specific license-based regime for foreign vessels, that makes it more sustainable, should bring down the price, and ensure that our fishing industry grows and adds to our overall food security. Meat is often given a bit of a bad name in terms of stability and impact on climate change, but I think a judicious allowance of a red meat industry, such as, for example, lamb, sheep grazing on the side of hills, which can't be used for anything else, lowers the impact on the climate, and it also helps, if we can grow that industry, we'll have more of a domestic supply. Finally, there has been this generation of a sort of synthetic carbon market, which has led to farmland being taken out of action for farming and then used to plant trees for carbon capture. On the balance of food security and helping climate change, it doesn't quite square with me. I think we should be prioritising the ability to grow crops, albeit with an educated agricultural workforce that farms in sustainable and conservationist manners. And the good thing about all three of those policies is that they help us consume food that's grown closer to home and should limit our impact on the climate.
What Scottish Labour have said is that we want to support small farmers and filters, invest in local fishing and farming sectors as well, and that includes a strategic review of local abattoirs and fish processing facilities to make sure that we can enhance and enable more of our food in Scotland to be grown and processed locally to support those local supply chains and the people that work in them. I think a key part of this debate is around supporting the next generation of crofters, fishermen, farmers, because we are seeing lots of young people leave those sectors or not move into them, maybe generations of farmers or fishermen that are now, looking at alternatives or not continuing in the sector. So a part of the picture for me and for Scottish Labour is around how we encourage that next generation in to really help decarbonise our food chain, make sure that the communities like Shetland and across the Highlands and Islands are able to thrive by keeping more people in the local area. And I certainly think that's key to helping, one, secure our food security, but two, helping invest in the future of the Highlands and Islands and that local supply chain that's so vital to decarbonising our economy.
Alan, you want to respond to that?
I'm not sure what to say. It comes into economics at the end of the day, I think, because food is very cheap at the moment, but folk complain about it being very expensive, but actually compared to other things like housing costs and energy costs, it's actually fairly cheap. We rely on extremely long, delicate supply chains where food is coming from across the world, and that exposes us to shocks around the world. And I think you just have to look at the fact that there's lamb available for New Zealand in the supermarkets to realise how crazy the food system that we have is. And I'm not sure how it can be changed, but I think it does need to be changed.
I'm used to like having polycrobs on a farm, but since then I've got disabled. But what I'd like to see, I suppose, from a community side is that when we build polycrobs into communities, into new housing developments, that they're fully accessible. Mm-hmm. Because the polycrobs, when I've seen projects in London that are sustainable, that are eco projects, they're fully community projects. So if you build your community around things like polycrobs and other things, you start finding members of the community can get left out, whether it's people that can't afford to buy seeds or compost because they're just at the poverty line, whether it's disabled people that need either to put a seat in or to use a wheelchair. Mm-hmm. So I guess for me it's about developing the whole future so the entire community is a community, not the charitable people that you give the vegetables to at the end of the day, that they can all be part of it, whether it's pouring a cup of tea for other people working on something else, that it's everybody can contribute.
All I was going to say was I think it's good to encourage people to start growing. I think grow boxes, as Hannah Mary has been talking about, is likely a good idea. But again, that's us looking at starting things and not sustaining things. Once you've got the grow boxes to families and to people, how do you then support them to keep going and to keep improving what they're doing and to bring the communities into those projects? And equally, it's very good to look at how we become food secure in the current climate and the current situation in which we exist. Mm-hmm. But in a world where there are reports coming out from government bodies, most recently, I believe 2 months ago, looking at how the Amazon rainforest as an ecosystem is on the verge of runaway collapse and corals are bleaching, and we have these global issues that are about to start destroying those very delicate food chains. How do we create the resilience and the food security not just today, but in 5 years' time in a worst case scenario? Where is our planning and our sustainability in those situations?
I think that's a really good point, and I think Alan's point and also what you said, as long as we agriculture is subsidized, and that's what crofters and farmers will do, is they make a living. If sheep is subsidized, you have sheep. If Chinese is subsidized, you go with Chinese. So a decision has to be taken on another level. How are we using this land, and what kind of agriculture are we all prepared to subsidize? Is it, in the case of Shetland, used to be a lot more self-sufficient, and they only had so many sheep that could actually feed on what's there. So there was no feed bought in, fertilizer bought in, reduced elsewhere, has a carbon footprint. To me, that's not a sustainable agriculture. Because we are subsidizing something that from a climate perspective is actually damaging because of the emissions. to grow certain things on Shetland. I mean, you just raise it to the crop basically. Yeah. So it is very important to change the policy and how agriculture is funded and what gets funded. Mm-hmm. And it should be something as well for the soil, and I take it that a farm should, or a crop should be a self-sufficient organism. Yeah? And that is something then that can continue to go on. Not just for 5 years, for 10 years, but for hundreds of years. If that.
Peter, do you want to?
Yes, well, 50 years ago, there used to be what you call the cropping grant.
Yeah.
And everybody grew their own vegetables. I think after they stopped that the Crofts just stopped growing vegetables.
Yeah.
So it could be reinstated.
I think the problem at the moment that I'm hearing is that producers want a market, and Shetland's a market. At the moment, an awful lot of it is exported. Because there is no market, there is no distribution. The perception is there's no desire, do you know what I mean, to eat. So whilst we're talking about community polygrubs and things like that, the education needs to go in hand with that. So there needs to be a community kitchen, there needs to be an educational programme. I mean, I visited something just last week where, you know, there was the growing, the kitchen, the community education that was all going to, and it's all of that that creates a demand, which creates a market that then allows then the producers to actually keep stuff here for us to consume rather than exporting it all. And I think that's something that, you know, we should create, that market and demand.
John?
I think, you know, we live in a world where efficiency is king. Largely down, you know, and like with energy, food is dominated by corporations on a global level and on a UK level. What that means for Shetland, what the efficiency means for Shetland is that we prioritise, we focus on the stuff that we can do best, which is basically lamb and fish. If we were to focus on resilience, which is what food security is, we would need to encourage diversification. We would need policies and support that allow crofters to grow things which aren't necessarily efficient to grow in Shetland. They can be grown, and we just look at Transition Torrfield for an amazing example of what can be grown, but it can't be grown under this efficiency-based food system. We need diversification, which is inefficient.
So I was taking a perspective of, it's been World Curlew Day this week, so I'm kind of thinking about what do birds need for our elected members. So I was thinking about subsidies. Only 5% of Scotland, the Scottish Government's farming budget goes directly into supporting nature-friendly farming. And agri-environment schemes don't necessarily work very well in Shetland just because of the way they're set up. So what will you do and who will you work with to ensure that Shetland's land, the crofting communities, the habitats and species are resilient to climate change and also support the good food nation principles that we've been kind of covering here?
It's really important that we work with food producers, land workers and crofters. As I said a couple of days ago, I was at a nature farm walk at Alan Fraser's Croft out in Was, and that was led by the SAC agricultural consultancies, and Paul, I forget his surname, was up from Aberdeenshire, and he's the national consultant on agri-environmental schemes. And it was a really fascinating evening. I learnt a lot. Really interesting to hear about habitat creation, habitat protection, how we can integrate food production with tree planting and providing space for wading birds and everything. It's incredibly complicated. I found it quite enlightening, but also it's fascinating how much attention to detail you need. And the other reflection on that was that every place is different, and I think it's not everywhere that every piece of land that's appropriate for agri-environmental schemes, but for the pieces of land that are, I think we really need big incentives for folk. So I think it's great to see support available through SAC for crofters who want to do that. And I think there's sort of a wider issue, which I think that there's a lot of friction between people who are sort of in the ecological, environmental space and people who are in the food producing space. And I think we really need to work together, and we need to have schemes which really bring food producers and ecologists, environmentalists together. And I think there's some great examples of that, like Species on the Edge. It's been really successful. Again, I visited another croft by Spiggy Loch, and we had a really great conversation about how that scheme was really helping to bring everyone together. I mean, ultimately we all need to eat, and we all care about the environment, and we need to work together. Thanks.
Emma, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is about getting all those key people in the same room and not having all these different conversations that everybody has. It's about getting everybody in the same place so we can really talk about what is needed, because too often people make decisions over here, people make decisions there, and actually when you join them all together it just doesn't work. So I think it's about making sure everybody is there and we just totally lay out what is needed and make sure that we can find solutions. But you only do that by working with people. It's about making sure you do that.
And you know, those two issues do obviously go hand in hand. And I think Scottish Labour have been clear that we need to protect Scotland's biodiversity and set clear targets so that both sides, industry and communities, know what we're looking to work towards. So in the fishing sector, for example, that would involve the introduction of a new green plan, so that coastal communities and the sector get clarity around responsibilities and their roles in managing the water efficiently. And again, it's about rewarding farmers for nature-friendly practices, and I think there's a lot more that the Scottish Government can do to incentivise nature restoration and environmental contributions that can be made by farmers and crofters as they help modernise that system, and we can help them incentivise that through payments. So I don't think these two things need to be competing. I think the sector needs to work together with support from the Scottish Government to both decarbonise and protect the food supply chain as well. So those two things I see as interlinked and going hand in hand, but we definitely need more support from the Scottish Government to be delivered.
Yeah, well, they're biodiversity schemes, but they're competitive and they're expensive to get into. So if the government wanted to encourage that, then they need to put more money into it, I think.
Clearly, what we have here in our land and our environment is not the same as down in the mainland of Scotland. And that's where I think that the Scottish Government needs, and I've had discussions with John about this, is move to more of a place-based system actually across Scotland on environment, on energy, on transport, on food, on nature, because we don't have sort of a monoculture and a sort of one-size-fits-all across the country. So I think it's about making sure that we have policies and procedures in place that protect and are applicable to Shetland, and that goes for food security, food production, nature preservation, but it goes wider and it goes on to transport, energy and all the other things. And that's an education, and that's a conversation and an awareness that Scottish Government, I think, really needs to increase its awareness on.
I think at the moment the Scottish Government support for agriculture is at £700 million, which is a very low, is it 1% of the total Scottish budget? And I think for a subject as important as what we eat, the food, our food system, I think we really need to pay a bit more attention to food production. I also agree with you, Alan. So much of our food system is geared towards export products, whiskey and salmon. And I understand those two industries are important for the Scottish economy, but actually we're facing a climate crisis, and one of the biggest fronts of that climate crisis is going to be food prices, and we need to be thinking ahead of the curve here. Food production, food security for local consumption is a massive issue that hasn't been a political issue. We need to make it a political issue. So we need to have politicians that can really push that issue of food in the places where decisions get made.
So actually ensuring that our communities are in a position where they have some more resilience, I think is really important. So that's definitely points that I've taken away from this, and that needs to be more of a priority. So thank you.
Can I just add in one mad statistic? Half of Scottish salmon production is air freighted through Heathrow. The same amount is imported from Norway. I think that sums up a lot.
Capitalism is great.
The question is, what does a sustainable and resilient Shetland look like?
To me, a sustainable, resilient Shetland is one that, like many of the subjects we've touched on tonight, is able to produce its own food, or as much of it as possible, clearly centred around our fishing industry. One that is able to produce its own energy. It already produces far in excess of its own energy required. Therefore, that energy should be affordable. And finally, one that takes care of its consumables. So reduced reliance on plastics, an increase in high quality non-plastic materials.
All the things we've spoken about tonight, we need to have energy that benefits the local community that's producing it. We need to make sure that we've got food security. But fundamentally, what comes down to sustainability for Shetland in the long term is the basics. It's about our housing stock, it's about our NHS, it's about our education and the opportunities for our young people here. So of course climate runs through all those issues, but fundamentally we need to get those basics right. Otherwise we can't look at a sustainable future. And all these wider pictures we've spoken about tonight, they're all underpinned by those issues about housing, education, our NHS, and making sure people have the local resources and facilities they need to stay in Shetland and in other parts of the Hills and Islands. And that is about getting the basics right for me. So that's what sustainable and resilient Shetland looks like for me.
I think we need to empower our community organisations and community development companies, and it's great to see such a great start with people like the North Yell Development Council, NCDC up in North Maven, Bressa Development Company, Bigton Collective. But I think we need to see energy owned and controlled by these communities. We need to see food production owned and controlled by these communities. I think that's the thing. But the key point that we haven't really talked about tonight is the thing that I really care about, which is human rights. And I think that as we move into a situation where the pressure on climate increases and increases, we're going to see more and more destabilization in our world that we're kind of currently seeing at the moment. But climate change is going to drive all of that, and I think we have to have a focus on holding up the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights in our society as the basis foundation of our society, because we have to be resilient to all of this stuff that's coming at us, and these are the core principles of fairness, of justice that we need to hold on to, because there are so many forces which are trying to strip away that focus on human rights, and I'm very worried about that.
Peter?
Well, if we'll be self-sufficient in food and energy, I think it would be a great step forward. I was wondering about this ammonia plant, if we'd be able to produce our own manure or fertiliser. We don't know about that yet, but that might be a step in the right direction.
The lady, I don't know your name.
Pia,
you mentioned a really important point at the beginning about the fact that this is a climate hustings and to be talking about emissions. And you look at when the very first time when countries got together to say we're going to put a limit on climate emissions was 1992 at the Kyoto Protocol. And since then, CO2 emissions have continued to rise year on year on year. There's only 2 times in recent history where they've actually come down, and that was in 2008 and 2020. It was the financial crash and it was COVID. And none of that came from technology advancements or innovation. It came from behavioural change, which is what you were talking about at the very beginning. And behavioural change...
Behavioural change and attitude. If you know you are in an emergency, nothing is going to be too expensive. So that's behavioural change on a massive scale.
Yes.
You know.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, I agree. So because, and if we talk about an emergency but just keep going, or go backwards. To me, that's not an emergency reaction.
Absolutely, and I think behavioural change at society level, individual level, but it also comes back to the principle of we need economics to make this work, to make the transition work. We cannot be green if we're in the red.
I could argue it was economics that got us where we are. I mean, you can turn this argument completely around.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a very lovely, it's not really lovely.
It's not lovely at all.
You don't know what I was going to say. I mean, crofting, I'm not going to romanticize about crofting, because certainly, hard labor, very little for it. But I've lost my thought. But it has changed. The moment you come in with economics and profit, easy capitalism. We are coming on we are at the peak of capitalism, and everything is collapsing. Our food system, our health system, human rights, you name it.
And that's why I really want to see us move away from a system that has energy privatising the profit on it. We need to move to a system where energy is a right, like I said at the beginning, like the NHS and like education.
As housing is.
When it comes to the sustainability of Shetland, I think I have to look at one of my heroes, which is Gro Harlem Brundtland. She was the first female Prime Minister of Norway. And she said that the ability to sustain was meeting the current needs and meeting the needs of future generations. And so for me, sustainable and resilient Shetland is about having affordable, reliable and sustainable food and energy and food production as well. And I think that for me is to look at what Gro Harlem Brundtland said, meet today and meet tomorrow.
So for me, what a sustainable and resilient Shetland looks like, it's really important that we have a Shetland where everybody is able to thrive. And currently we have a really unequal society. We have too many people in Shetland who are really struggling to live well. So we have to make sure that when we do any of these things that we've been talking about today, we don't leave people behind, that there are not people who can't afford to do the things that we know they need to do. We need to drive down their energy costs. We need to support people, because currently the difference that we're seeing here is so vast that people are finding it really hard. So we have to tackle that. We won't have a sustainable and resilient Shetland if we have half our community who are struggling to live well.
Okay, well, the way to solve all the problems is open up Jackdaw, open up Campbell, open up Rosebank. The Norwegians care about the environment. They're very active in the North Sea.
Thank you very much for your time, audience, dear audience, and candidates. We've moved from the Stone Age to the end of capitalism. I think we did well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.